My name is Anthony. I'm 62 years old, and for the better part of 3 decades, I served as the chief financial officer of Vegacorp Industries, one of the most powerful manufacturing firms in Alta Vista, a booming metropolis near the Pacific coast. For 30 years, my world was a fortress of balance sheets, fiscal forecasting, and decisions that shifted tens of millions of pesos like pawns on a chessboard. But behind the veil of calculated precision, my soul belonged elsewhere. My true obsession, my fatal flaw, was always my family. Celia, my wife, our children, Stephen and Amanda. They were the axis of everything. Every peso earned, every promotion clawed through bloodless corporate warfare. I saw them first. When Stephen expressed his dream of studying a master's program at the Gran Universidad de Monterrey, I wired the 850,000 pesos without a flicker of hesitation. When Amanda envisioned launching her boutique on Roma Avenue in Capital Federal, I covered the full 2 million peso startup cost. As for Celia, there were no limits. A new Jaguar each year, Tuscan summers, the clifftop villa overlooking the bay at El Tesoro. I bought her dreams before she had to voice them. At the office, I was known as El Silenti, quiet, composed, predictable, a man who could weather economic storms with the serenity of a monk. But in the last chapter of my professional life, something began to splinter. At home, not at work. Celia grew elusive. Her phone became an appendage, and her voice, once tender, had turned into whispers that dissolved the moment I crossed the threshold. Stephen and Amanda became oddly curious. They started asking about succession plans, about assets, about what would happen when the time came. That should have been the red flare. But love has a way of dulling a man's instincts. The day of my retirement celebration arrived with the air of a long-awaited victory. A modest backyard gathering family, a few old colleagues, familiar faces dulled by age but warmed by nostalgia. I was content. Celia and I had made our plans. Travel the country in the RV we just purchased. Spoil the grandchildren we hoped would arrive soon. Perhaps settle into a seaside cottage in Bahia del Sol. Then everything detonated. She approached me with a peculiar smile. Forced, sharp-edged. In her hand was a manila envelope. "Anthony," she said, her tone cool as marble, "I've brought you something for your retirement." Inside, divorce papers. I blinked, the world momentarily blurring around the ink on the page. Irreconcilable differences. Division of assets. Spousal support. Celia leaned in, her voice a soft knife. "I didn't marry a pensioner, Anthony, and I don't plan to nurse one." My breath turned to glass in my throat. I turned toward our guests, and that's when I saw him, a man I'd never met, standing smugly by the gate, watching like a vulture. Then I looked at Stephen and Amanda. No shock, no confusion, just a silent exchange between them, an unspoken confirmation. "You knew," I said. My voice came from somewhere deeper than my lungs. Stephen gave a slow shrug. "Papa, you have to understand. Mom deserves her happiness. And, well, we have to think about our future too." Amanda offered a tight smile. "It's a lot to manage, everything you've built. Maybe it's time someone else took over." That's when I understood. This wasn't about Celia's joy. It was about control, power, money, my money. They saw me as a walking inheritance, a frail old man they could coax into compliance with forged smiles and platitudes. They were counting on senility, on surrender, on quiet death. But they'd misjudged me. They never truly knew Anthony, the strategist behind Vegacorp's rise. They only knew the version who made birthday pancakes and paid tuition without question. I folded the papers with a surgeon's calm and slipped them into my pocket. "Of course," I said. "I'll sign." After dessert, the party carried on, but I had already vanished. Mentally, spiritually. I watched Celia throw her head back in laughter with the stranger. I watched my children leaning close, whispering, plotting. They were carving up the corpse before it had stopped breathing. What they didn't know was that for the last 5 years, guided by an instinct honed by decades of risk management, I had quietly restructured everything. Diversified, hidden, offshore accounts under aliases, blind trusts, minority holdings in ventures they'd never trace. 3 days later, I signed the divorce agreement. I followed the law to the letter, gave Celia the house, half the visible accounts, the standard alimony. But the real estate, the silent partnerships, the buried wealth, they remained untouched. Invisible. They thought they'd gutted me. They had only drawn first blood. I gave Stephen and Amanda a few crumbs, just enough to keep the illusion alive. Some shares in the company. Access to an old trust I'd created back when I still believed loyalty was something money couldn't corrupt. They thought they'd hit the jackpot. They had no idea they'd just lost the war. The very next day I vanished. Not in the physical sense. I didn't fake my death or forge a new identity. But to Celia, Stephen, and Amanda, it was as though I'd been erased from the earth. I cut off the phone line, deleted every social media account, disappeared into the silence. I moved to a cabin I'd bought under a different name, nestled deep in the pine forests outside Creole, in the Sierra Tarahumara, for acres of rugged, wind-swept solitude. No neighbors, no questions, just quiet. The kind of quiet you need when you're reconstructing yourself from the ashes of betrayal. They tried to reach me, of course. In the first few days, my old number rang nonstop. Celia's voicemails were drenched in mock concern. Anthony, we really should finalize some pension details. It's urgent. Stephen sounded more like a junior executive trying not to panic. Papa, where are you? We need to clarify a few things about the corporate accounts. Amanda, as always, skipped the performance. This is absurd. You can't just walk away like this. Answer me. But I could. And I did. Summer dissolved into autumn. Winter came cloaked in fog and frost. While they hunted for Anthony, the wounded, aging man they believed they had beaten, I was evolving into something else. Something leaner, sharper, hungrier. The skills I'd once used to steer Vegacorp's billion-peso machinery hadn't faded with my resignation. On the contrary, for the first time in decades, I was free to use them solely for myself. I built a miniature command center inside the cabin. 3 ultra-wide monitors, satellite internet, a broker's toolkit refined by experience and instinct. I started modestly short-term trades, watching emerging markets like a hawk. I read reports the way a hunter reads tracks. In 6 months, I had doubled my initial capital. In a year, tripled it. While others were throwing fortunes into crypto hysteria, chasing hype, I kept to the shadows. I invested in blockchain firms with real infrastructure, tangible roadmaps. Let them gamble with meme coins. I was building an empire in silence. But the money, ironically, was only part of the revenge. The real project was Anthony 2.0. At 63, I started rebuilding my body the way I had rebuilt my finances, with discipline and fury. Daily gym sessions, long treks across Chihuahua's mountain trails, a clean, deliberate diet. No more conference room lunches. No more stress-induced ulcers. I let the gray in my beard grow wild. Traded my corporate uniforms for clothes that finally felt like mine. I learned guitar. Not to impress anyone. Just to feel the vibration of something real under my fingertips. It was during one of those misty morning walks that I met Rebecca. She owned a small bookstore in Creole. 52. Silver curls. Eyes that seemed to see past the surface of things. She smiled like someone who had learned not to waste time on people who didn't matter. She'd been through her own fire. Divorced, no children, plenty of scars. But she still lit up when talking about poetry or old trains or places she'd never been. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours. Books, regrets, buried dreams. On our third date, she looked at me and said, "You have the air of someone who survived something brutal and came out stronger." She was right. 8 months later, we married in a quiet courthouse ceremony in Krill. No spectacle. Just 2 witnesses, a signature, and something unshakably true. Half a year after that, we adopted Laura. An 8-year-old girl abandoned by her birth parents and nearly lost in the chaos of the system. Watching Rebecca braid Laura's hair each morning, hearing that little girl's laugh echo across the porch. Those moments carved away what bitterness still lingered. They didn't erase the betrayal, but they showed me what had been missing in Guadalajara, and what I'd unknowingly gained by losing it all. Meanwhile, my portfolio exploded. 2 of the startups I funded were snapped up by Silicon Valley monoliths. My dividend income exceeded my former Vegacorp salary by double. I bought land, commercial properties, took silent stakes in 3 private equity funds. In less than 3 years, my net worth eclipsed anything I'd built during my entire marriage to Celia. But more importantly, more deliciously, I was no longer their prey. Laura would curl up beside me and whisper, "Dad, you're the smartest man in the world." Rebecca looked at me each morning like I was a sunrise she never expected. We had no yachts, no gala dinners, no gold-plated anything. Just peace, just truth. But make no mistake, I hadn't forgotten. Revenge doesn't always come as fire and fury. Sometimes it arrives as silence, as success, as the beautiful, brutal life lived without those who thought they had destroyed you. And the best part? They still don't know what's coming. Evenings had become a quiet ritual. Family dinners by candlelight. Sophia practicing her multiplication while Rebecca and I played Scrabble at the kitchen table, laughing over nonsense words that somehow made it into the game. Weekend drives to the Sierra, thermos full of coffee, the scent of pine in the air. For a while, it felt like the storm had passed. Then came the call. Year 4 of my new life. A crisp autumn morning. My lawyer from Alta Vista, Dr. Ronald, reached out with the kind of voice a man uses when stepping around broken glass. "Anthony," he began, "your ex-wife has been trying to reach me. She's requesting a revision to the alimony terms. Says she's in financial distress." Financial distress. How poetic. "And my children?" I asked, knowing what was coming. "They've contacted me as well." Stephen mentioned complications with his business. "Amanda, her boutique closed last year. She's asking for financial guidance." For the first time in nearly half a decade, I smiled. Not cruelly, just with a sense of justice being delivered, quiet and cold. "Dr. Perez," I said, my voice measured, "please inform them that Mr. Salvatierra does not wish to be contacted. If they persist, you have full legal authority to ensure my privacy. Understood?" A pause. "They seem genuinely desperate," he said softly. "I know," I replied. "That's how I designed it." The final phase of my plan had begun. They had discarded me the moment they believed I was no longer useful. Now they would come to understand, painfully, just how much it cost to underestimate someone they thought obsolete. The months that followed were a silent opera of unraveling. I watched it all from my hilltop home, sipping tea while the world I'd left behind crumbled in perfect sequence. Dr. Perez became my conduit to their downfall. He relayed their stories like chapters in a novel I had already written. One foggy winter morning, he called again. "Anthony." He began with the solemnity of a man delivering a eulogy. "Emily's in real trouble. The man she left you for, his name is Jeffrey, we've learned, turned out to be a fraud." The irony didn't even sting. It was too exquisite. "Not a businessman at all," Perez continued. "He was a professional scam artist. Targeted Emily deliberately. Saw her as low-hanging fruit, a newly divorced woman with liquid assets and no financial expertise. He'd convinced her to invest 4 million pesos, money from the division of property, and another million from the emergency fund I had generously left her. All of it into a bogus import-export venture. The company didn't exist. The legal documents were forged. The supposed headquarters was a rented office on a month-to-month lease. And Jeffrey? Not even his real name. He's currently renting a one-bedroom apartment in Tlaquepaque," Perez added. "After he vanished with the money, she tried to sue. But there's nothing to recover. It's all gone." I said nothing. Just listened to the wind outside, rustling the leaves like a whispered confession. "She lost the house in Las Lomas," Perez went on. "Couldn't pay the mortgage without the supplemental support she assumed you'd continue. And the alimony. Yes, the alimony. That particular trap had been laid with surgical precision. When I signed the divorce agreement, I disclosed only my base salary from a modest position in a regional dairy consortium, income that looked sufficient on paper, but paltry in reality. Everything else, my trusts, offshore holdings, equity positions, was sealed behind legal structures she couldn't touch or even trace. As a result, her alimony was calculated on a fraction of what she'd expected. 25,000 pesos a month. Enough to meet my legal obligations, but not enough to fund the lifestyle she believed was her right. Meanwhile, I lived luxuriously off income streams she never knew existed. Even the assets she received in the division were poison gifts. The dairy shares? I knew the company was headed for turbulence. Within 8 months, the news broke. Deregulation, foreign competition, profit collapse. Her portfolio lost 60% of its value in the first year. The rest of her settlement? High-risk funds, heavily leveraged, wrapped in layers of complexity. They looked strong on the surface, but I knew they were hollow, like a house built on sand. And the children? I asked, though I already knew. Perez exhaled. Stephen fell for a cryptocurrency startup. Flashy website, big promises, lots of buzz about disrupting global finance. He invested almost everything, his share from the divorce, a second mortgage on the house, even his kids' university fund. He paused. It was a Ponzi scheme. Of course it was. He lost $8 million. He's being sued by creditors. And Amanda, well, she's working part-time at a real estate office in Zapopan, barely making ends meet. I closed my eyes. For a brief second, I saw their younger selves. Stephen as a boy, always rushing, never listening. Amanda, stubborn, proud, convinced she was sharper than the world around her. I had tried to teach them caution, restraint, discipline, but arrogance has a way of drowning wisdom. Let them drown, I thought. They built their boats from betrayal. Justice doesn't always wear a robe or carry a gavel. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the form of a silent phone, an empty bank account, the echo of a door you slammed shut, now locked forever. And behind that door, a man reborn, watching, waiting, unforgiven. Stephen had always relied on instinct over discipline. Now that impulse had cost him not just his savings, but the very future of his family. And Amanda, her boutique, once a gleaming fantasy of curated fabrics and minimalist interiors, had collapsed the previous year. She had expanded too quickly. 2 additional stores in upscale Roma Norte, all opened within 12 months. No cash flow, no cushion. When the pandemic struck, she was trapped. 3 sky-high leases, dwindling foot traffic, and creditors circling like vultures. The boutique went under with nearly 4 million pesos in debt. Amanda had always coveted the best, designer labels, imported wine, the illusion of affluence. I had financed her first store because she knew, deep down, she didn't have the discipline or temperament to build something durable. She wanted the Instagram version of entrepreneurship, not the relentless arithmetic that decides between survival and collapse. They've become more persistent, Dr. Perez said on the line. Emily called my office 17 times last week. Stephen sent a 3-page letter, explaining everything, pleading for a conversation. Amanda is apologizing, profusely, promising she'll never again be part of any conspiracy. He let the word linger. Conspiracy. How fitting. After all these years, they finally admitted it had been a coordinated ambush. That retirement party had been nothing but a performance, a smiling execution. They're desperate, Anthony, Perez continued. Emily's considering filing for personal bankruptcy. Stephen may lose his home. Amanda moved back in with her mother. They're living together in a 2-bedroom apartment in Tlaquepaque. As he spoke, I watched Rebecca and Laura from the terrace of our home, a sprawling 200-hectare ranch that crowned a ridge in the Tarahumara Mountains. The morning sun bathed the valley in gold. Laura was teaching Rebecca to ride one of the horses. Their laughter rose in waves through the crisp air, untainted by the shadows of my past. Dr. Perez, I said finally, they're free to keep trying, but my position stands. Anthony does not wish to be contacted by those people. There was a pause. I understand, but Emily mentioned hiring a private investigator. I smiled faintly. They can search all they want, I said, but the Anthony they're looking for disappeared from public records 5 years ago. It was true. I had changed my official residence to the state of Chihuahua, restructured every business under an intricate network of corporations, and even modified my civil registry. Not illegally, just thoroughly, intimately. I knew the Mexican legal system like the palm of my hand after 30 years as CFO. Every loophole was a doorway, and I had passed through them all. But Anthony, Perez asked softly now, they were your family. I watched Laura wave at me from the stable, her cheeks flushed from riding. Rebecca looked up from the garden and smiled. No, I said. My family is here. Those people in Alta Vista were just an expensive lesson, paid for in trust and blood. It was time. Time to end the chapter for good. The morning was bright, tender with the scent of spring. Exactly 5 years to the day since that garden party where they'd lit the match that burned our world down. Inside, Rebecca was making pancakes. Laura was at the piano, rehearsing a Chopin prelude for her school recital. The notes floated through the house like something ancient and clean. Then the phone rang. Dr. Perez again. "There's been a development," he said. "Yes. Emily's in the hospital. Severe anxiety attack. She's being treated for depression and acute financial stress." There was a moment of absolute stillness inside me. No anger, no glee, no pity. Just a clean, quiet void where once there had been 30 years of complicated emotion. "And the children?" "Stephen called me," Perez said. "He was crying, Anthony. Literally crying. He says he needs 5 minutes of your time. Just 5. He's lost. He's asking for guidance. Amanda hasn't said anything lately, but I imagine she's the one pushing him." I looked around my home. Rebecca flipped pancakes, humming a soft melody. Laura played, her tiny fingers dancing along the keys with the kind of hope only a child can carry. 5 years ago, I had been nothing more than a provider to people who treated me like a ledger line, something to be used, balanced, and discarded. Now I was a father, a husband, a mentor. I was loved for the man I was, not the money I made. "Dr. Perez," I said, "I'd like to send a final letter, to all 3 of them. The same words. Can you take it down?" "Of course." I took a breath. "Dear Emily, Stephen, and Amanda, the man you discarded 5 years ago no longer exists. What remains has not forgotten. You judged me as a frail, useless retiree. You have now discovered how much that miscalculation has cost you. There will be no second chance. No reconciliation. No financial rescue. You made your decisions based on greed and convenience. Now live with the consequences. Sincerely, Anthony." Perez was silent for a moment. "That's all?" he asked, surprised. "That's everything," I replied. Outside, the music continued. Inside, the past finally went quiet. "No," I told Perez. "Include a photo." That same afternoon, Rebecca, Laura, and I posed together in front of our home. Not the first cabin where I'd gone to disappear, but our true sanctuary, a 200-hectare estate nestled in the highlands of Chihuahua. The stone and wood house stood proudly against the backdrop of the Tarahumara Mountains. Behind us, the stables stretched out beside the circular drive, where our deep blue Tesla Model S gleamed in the sun. Parked farther out near the private hangar sat our weekend plane, waiting for the next trip to Mazatlan. In the photo, I wore jeans and a denim shirt, simple clothes I'd never have allowed myself in Alta Vista. Rebecca, radiant as ever, wore a cotton summer dress that danced in the breeze. Laura cradled Duque, our golden retriever, adopted just a year before. Our smiles weren't posed. They were the kind that only come from peace hard-earned. On the back of the photograph, in my own hand, I wrote, "The Salvadierra family, Chihuahua, 2024. Built on love, not money." 3 weeks later, Perez called again. "Your letter," he said, "had an impact." I could almost hear his raised eyebrows through the phone. "Emily tried to call my office 46 times in one day. Stephen sent a 12-page letter. Honestly, I couldn't finish reading it. Felt more like a confession than a response." "And Amanda?" I asked. "She showed up in person. In my office. Said you'd won. That they finally understood it was never about the money, but about dignity. Loyalty. Respect. She asked me to tell you they're proud of the man you've become, but they know it's too late." "Proud," I said aloud, the word brittle on my tongue. "She also asked if you were truly happy." I didn't answer right away. "When I showed her the photo," Perez continued, "she stared at it for 5 minutes. Said, 'He looks 20 years younger.' I never saw him smile like that when he lived with us." Amanda was always the more perceptive one. It seemed she had finally understood that the man they had known, the man they'd manipulated, wasn't me. He was just a version shaped by years of obligation, by the grinding duty to protect people who saw generosity as a bottomless well. "Anthony," Perez asked cautiously, "do you feel satisfaction from their suffering?" I thought for a moment, searching my chest for the old stone of bitterness. "No," I said, "not satisfaction. Relief. For years, I carried betrayal like a tumor under my ribs. But now, that weight is gone. Not because they're struggling, but because I finally built something better. Real. Watching them collapse didn't give me joy. It gave me proof. Proof that walking away was the only way forward. Do you think, he asked, you'll ever reconsider? They were, biologically, your family. I looked out the window. Rebecca was pruning her herb garden. Laura was reading under the fig tree, her schoolbooks open in her lap. Duque sprawled at her feet. Dr. Perez, I said, family isn't blood. Family is daily acts of love. Loyalty. Choice. Rebecca chooses me every morning. Laura chooses to call me Dad. And I choose to protect them. That's family. Emily, Stephen, Amanda, they made their choices too. They saw me as a resource. They plotted, they discarded me. That wasn't just betrayal, it was a derevocation. A decision to stop being family. 6 months passed. Then one last call. Anthony, Perez said. Final update. Emily had moved into a government-assisted senior facility. She was quiet, alone. Stephen had taken a modest accounting job in Puerto Vallarta. He was slowly rebuilding paycheck by paycheck, but his former lifestyle was gone. Amanda had gone back to college. 42 years old, now training to become an elementary school teacher. A simpler life, quieter one. They survived, Perez said softly, and that was all I had ever needed to know. Today, 2 years since I sent that final letter, I wake each morning in a house filled with laughter and promise. Laura is 15 now, independent, brilliant, driven. She earned a full academic scholarship on her own merit, no legacy donations, no strings, because Rebecca and I taught her that success is not inherited. It's earned. Rebecca, ever vibrant, has expanded her bookstore to 3 cities across Chihuahua. She's begun outlining a novel, a real one. And me, at 67, I am more alive than I ever was in the suits and silence of Alta Vista. My wealth continues to grow, but it no longer fuels ego or obligation. It builds something lasting, something true, not a legacy of assets, a legacy of love. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light settles softly over the valley, Rebecca asks me if I ever miss my old life. I always give her the same answer. You can't miss something that was never truly yours. What I had back then wasn't a life, it was a performance. A daily ritual of self-erasure, wrapped in duty and expectation. The betrayal by Emily, Stephen, and Amanda wasn't just the end of a marriage or a family. It was the beginning of me, because from that fracture the real Anthony emerged. A man who finally understood that the sharpest form of revenge is not to destroy those who tried to destroy you, but to build something so whole, so luminous, so untouchable, that they cease to matter at all. They taught me truths I now live by. That love cannot be bought, but it can be lost. That family is not a right. It's a privilege, earned through loyalty, through presence, through choice. That the deepest response to betrayal is not fury, but the quiet indifference born of a beautifully lived life. I did not burn bridges. I built new roads. And on those roads I found Rebecca. I found Laura. I found myself. If the story moved you, if it reminded you of the strength that can come from letting go, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, of personal justice, rebirth, and quiet revenge, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for being here. Until next time.